Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft and another edition of the Book of Genesis. And today I'm going to take a hopefully fairly quick look at scribing, riveting, reinstating and creating surface detail. Quite a big subject I suppose, but this is going to be a quick overview. I am not going to cover all of the avenues and all of the possibilities and tools out there. Simply the ones I use, which as you can see are quite varied. So I've grouped them here into the sort of type of tool they are. These being scribing, sort of cutting scribing tools. Here we've got pokey scribing tools, riveting implements here, and then chisel tools here. Some of these tools unfortunately aren't possible to get hold of anymore, but in most cases I think there are sort of reasonable alternatives out there, and where I know about that I'll let you know. I'll also put some links in the description if I can find any of these online to be purchased. So I've just got this is an old Hasegawa P47. I bought it as part of a job lot of kits that had been scratched around that, and it's ended up being a full-on mule, so we'll just play with that to do a few of the techniques. But first off then, quick look at the tools themselves. So for the majority, and I mean the majority of scribing that I do, I use one stop rolling flipping X-Lite. I use these. These are Alpha P cutters. As you can see, the larger one is an 800, the smaller the 450. I believe I'm correct in saying that the P Cutter 450 is the same actually as the Tamiya scribing tool. I think if you buy a Tamiya scriber it's actually one of these, but it's not yellow. I got this quite recently. It took me a lot of years to find one of these. They're quite hard to get hold of in this country, unless you buy the Tamiya one clearly. This one I've had since ever. It's 100,000 years old and I use it constantly, as you can see by the patina. It's my go-to scribing tool. So that's those. In terms of pokey scribing, so by that I mean using things which you poke rather. These cut. These have a V-shaped cutting blade on them. If you need to poke scribe, so I'm talking about, for example, places like here, something like this. If you needed to scribe that, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get this tool in there, especially. It's sort of vaguely possible while it's like this, but if the wing were fitted, it's really not going to happen. Even the smaller one, because of the angle of the blade, you can't really get it in there. So in those cases you have to use something like this. This is an actual sold as a scriber scribing tool by Plus Model. It's literally sort of a pin by style holder with a long pointed implement within, which I'll now and again sort of clean up and sharpen just with sanding tools. And it's used simply by inserting it where you want it and scratching. And in the same vein, where's he gone? Here he is. This is an X-Lite. Oh no, this is a cheap copy, but this is an X-Lite style scalpel holder, scalpel blade holder, and instead of a scalpel in it, it's got a needle, and this is a needle which has been massaged into a kind of a blunt point. And again, this is quite useful for getting into little corners and doing areas like that. This is a little different. This is an X-Lite handle, an old X-Lite scalpel handle. And if you're wondering what that is in there, it's actually a photo etched razor saw blade. Such fine teeth that you can't really even see them. And you might think, what on earth would you have a razor saw for scribing? Well, you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's really the actual best thing to use, and I'll try and show an example of that. Okay, let's do those last. So these here are chisels. This is a Mission Models micro chisel. I don't think these are actually available to buy anymore. I've certainly struggled to find them recently. If anyone knows different, I'd love you to let me know in the comments, because I wouldn't mind getting some new ends for them. But you don't often use this, well, you never use this for scribing, but you do sometimes use them for reinstating corners of things if need be. They can be really, really good for that. You could use them in the manner of a wood chisel, actually, just to get into corners of things, like here, for instance. If that was rounded off or had got muck and mess in it, I really wish there we go. You can use it like this. You can poke down just like you would with an actual chisel, just to clean things out. And this one I've just bought from Amazon. I will put the link for this below, but do beware of it. It wasn't very much money. I can't remember how much it was, but it wasn't terribly expensive, which is why I bought it, because I've not used these type of scribers before. They're popping up increasingly in other people's build logs, so I thought I'd have a look. And it's a blade. Essentially, it's a chisel. Okay, and the difference between this and something like this is that when this digs out a groove, it will dig out a square groove, where this will dig out a V-shaped groove. So the blade on this comes to a V. It's not super sharp, you struggle to cut yourself with it. It comes to a V like any blade would. So the harder you scribe, the wider the line will be up to the full width of the blade, but it will always, the groove will always taper into a V. Whereas this, the deeper you go, it will make no difference to the width of the groove, because it's a parallel ended tool and the bottom of the groove will be square. So technically potentially superior in a lot of cases. This came in a little set. It's in this little plastic tub. So there's a selection of different sized groovers or chisels going. I can't remember the sizes nominally. There was something like 0.3, 0.5, 0.81mm and 1.5, something like that. Clearly the bigger ones have minimal use to us for scribing, but you can potentially use them for other things. And the armour modellers can use them for scribing, actually. It came with an Allen key and 2 grub screws. So the grub screws are for holding in the blade so that you can interchange them. Clearly the Allen key is for turning said grub screws. Problem being, the Allen key does not fit the grub screws, so the size of this is sort of, it appears to be about a 1.85mm hex drive, and this is a 2mm Allen key. And the grub screws also don't fit the thread in the handle, so that was a unilateral fail and was never going to hold the blade in any way, shape or form. So I went down to the garage. This is just an M3, stainless steel M3 hex head, and that does hold it in, but it is quite dodgy. I don't think it's going to last very long in use, but this was quite cheap, so it was just to try out these tools. Went on a bit there, sorry. And the last one's a riveting tool. So this one here, again, is in an X-Acto scalpel blade holder. This is the RB Productions Riveting, the Rivet-R. It's a brilliant little tool, along the lines of the sort of Rosie the Riveters. Really nicely done, made out of photo etched stainless. There are various different sized and pitched wheels that you can interchange on here, and they just fit in the end of this handle, and they're really nifty. Again, I don't think you can buy these anymore, which is a real shame because they're very good. So I will be probably in the market for a new set of riveters before too long. So this just produces a line of circular depressions. If you want a more realistic representation of a recess, or a flush rivet than that, what you actually need is to print a small circle into the surface of the model, and for that I have 2 things. This here that I've got in my hands now is a Hasegawa Tri-Tool rivet stumper. I'm not even kidding, a rivet stumper. This it's made of steel, it's quite heavy, it's beautifully made, and it has this pointed end that's got a hole in it, so when you press it into the plastic you get a little circle. The end unscrews, so you could clearly put different sized ends in it for different sized circles, but despite looking, I've never actually found different sized ends or handles anywhere, ever. Again, if anybody knows of any, do let me know. But so that only does a 0.25. But what I have got here is a set I bought many years ago from what was at the time Kamet. Of, I think these are nominally are beading tools. I hope you can maybe see, it's difficult, that they've got this sort of shallow depression in the end with a circle, so that they create a circle in the surface, and if you press them hard enough it'll be a circle with a sort of dome inside it. And there's a whole bunch of different sizes. Some of them have they've got numbers written on them. It's like 6, 8, 7, but those numbers don't equate to a size particularly, it's just the number of the thing, the tool. And you get this little wooden gadget to just press in and out of there, and it just saves your hand a bit. You just press. So there you go, that's a little quick look at the tools I actually use commonly all the time. And now I'll just do a quick little demo on a little Thunderbolt of how to use them. So I'll just get everything to one side a little bit, and I'll try to work under the view of the camera, but I apologise in advance if I fail, because it's way further over the desk than I normally work, so it's really difficult for me to see what I'm doing whilst also showing you what I'm doing, so bear with me, be patient. So, typical scenario, we have here our carefully constructed fine model kit, and we've sanded the seam. I haven't sanded it fully, it's just for the sake of showing you. We've sanded the joint line, so we need to reinstate some panel lines, or at least clear out the rubbish. And the normal way I would do this is with this tool here, the Alpha 800. So locate the panel line you wish to fix, and the way I do it, note the way I hold this thing, I'm really just holding the blade, I'm supporting the weight on my finger, I'm just holding the blade with these two finger and thumb. So steady it against the kit with another finger, luckily you do have several. Find the panel line with the end, do you hear the click? Just gently drawing that across the surface sideways until I find the panel line and engage it, and then I literally push it forwards, slowly, carefully, till I engage with the other side. The thing with this tool, the angle at which the blade interacts with the surface affects how it cuts. If you're just looking to start the line, hold it at quite a shallow angle and it won't really cut, it'll almost just kind of press a line. And then when you're ready to cut, you've got something to follow, tip it up more. You can kind of hear it. It'll just start to dig out a groove. And there's your panel line back. You can also use it to clear out the dust from panel lines, and I tend to use it the other way to do that. Again, locate it, and it's just the weight of the tool doing this. I'm steadying myself on the tip of the fin. Just drag it along. And just clear that rubbish out of the panel line. All the way around. Just like that. So the 450 is used in exactly the same way. Locate the line, push it along forwards. The blade is exactly the same thickness. You don't gain any finesse in that respect with this tool, but what you do have is just generally a smaller, lighter tool that you can get into different areas a little more easily. So what if I'd completely removed a panel line? Say there was a panel line going along there that I'd completely removed through my ham-fisted sanding and filling, and I needed to put back. And this is where you always get the Dymo tape aficionados coming into play. Dymo tape, what even is that, for goodness sake? Who has Dymo tape anymore anyway? I'm aware, of course, that certain purveyors of modelling tools you never knew you needed do actually sell a scribing tape now, which I presume is some kind of relabeled Dymo tape. But yeah, I've never ever used it. And I'll show you what I do use if I need a strong guideline to scribe along. I don't have a flexible steel ruler in, so in lieu of that I'll tend to use something like this. Is a scribing template, as you can see. I tend to use these quite frequently for this sort of thing, but I'm going to lay it on the model where I want my panel line, and I'm going to draw with a pencil. Don't know if you can even see that. I can see it. I've drawn a line with a pencil, and because this has previously been sanded with a sponge, the pencil line is visible. It will draw on the surface. Then I'm going to get my P800. I'm going to locate the pencil line and I'm going to follow it. I'm not looking at the tool, I'm looking just ahead of it. I'm being very gentle. You should be able to see the little curl of plastic coming away. I get to the end and I stop. What I've got now is a very faint line, and then I'm just going to run up and down it a few times, bearing the angle but being gentle and being careful so as not to just, you don't want to grab the plastic and end up with deep spots in your line. And if I get a sponge, just give it a quick once over so you can actually see what I've done, because the dust will go into it. There's my new panel line, just like that. If you can drive in a straight line, you can scribe in a straight line. You will find if you try to do it this way, if you try to pull it backwards, it's a lot more difficult. I did that off camera, didn't I? If you try to pull it backwards when you're actually installing a line, it is really difficult to hold it. It will wander. But if you go forwards, you can just guide it. Look where you're going. Make a new line. I do the same thing if I'm rescribing a raised kit. I'll just locate the blade next to the raised panel line and just follow it. And once I've got the new recess line, just sand the raised one off and you're done. If you need to go across a seam, another ruler you can use. This is a little piece of the framework from an old photo etch fret. Just cut it off because it doesn't need to be, but it is perfectly straight, and it's also very flexible, so you can install that where you need it, like so. And you can either hold it in place with some of your many fingers, or you can tape it down and then use it just as a guide and just scribe along it. Now you will find, let me tape it on to show you what I'm talking about. If you're going to scribe into a curved area like a wing root or some such, using a sort of a needle scriber, you will have to use a guide. It's pretty much impossible to get those things to go straight without some sort of a guide. So put that into position. I've taped it down firmly. I have only left showing the part I actually need, and now it's super easy for me to use that as a guide and just punch that line back in. And because this is so flexible, this stuff, you can use that absolutely anywhere, including places like this. And because it's a piece of scrap photo etch framing, it doesn't really matter when it gets all bent up and horrible. You can just throw it away and make a new piece. So Jen's top tip there. So that covers this sort of tool, and it covers the pokey kind. I also use these for singular rivets, so in the case of something like a hatch, an access panel or hatch, you lose them, you just stick it in, no messing, to make new fasteners. This one, the pointy one makes quite small holes, and my blunted off needle makes slightly bigger ones. I'll put some more on here. Bigger, more rounded ones. Just in that hatch there. So where you've got sort of, when you've got a line of fasteners running across something, I'll tend to use one of these just to dot them back in, because it's so difficult to get a rivet wheel to line up that, you know, you might as well not bother. So if you've over here we've got some circle fasteners along there. So for those I use these beading tools. Just select something. Stick it in the holder. I'm going to put some along this bottom edge. Mark them out if you want to, or use a divider or something to mark out the panel so you get them equal distant. And be careful, because it's ever so easy to slip with this thing, and I have put it into my finger a few times. You have to use quite a lot of pressure. And see how I'm just rotating it and wobbling it so that each part of the tool engages with the surface of the kit. You can see there I've stamped 3 new circles into that panel. So that's how you use that. I did once rivet an entire 1/32 Focke-Wulf 190 Dora using those. Took a minute. For the fast and simple edition of, albeit less realistic rivets, you use the wheel. Again, you can draw a pencil line to follow, or you can just wing it. You just roll it up the panel. Yet again, I'm going forwards, not backwards. It is easier to see where you're putting the tool if you go forwards than it is if you go backwards. And there's my... God damn it, I've got a slope on this desk, haven't I? There's my line of rivets, hopefully visible. I can't see it on the screen there. But it really is that quick, and that easy. The only issue with these type of rivet tools is if you're going up a panel, you can't really afford to stop, take the tool away, because relocating it back into that line perfectly is nigh on impossible. You have to set yourself up so that each run of rivets you can get it in one go. Okay. So if you're of a nervous disposition and don't fancy just trying to follow a pencil line, but if you're also too lazy, like I am, to go around sellotaping pieces of brass to your model to follow, another quick and easy way to give yourself a scribing guide is just actually a piece of tape. So I'll just show you that. Just pop the piece of tape wherever you want the line to be, obviously. Push it down. And again, this time you can do a similar thing to when we put the line back in. Locate the edge of the tape, and again, initially just gently follow it. It's just enough. If you're too rough with it, of course this will go through the tape, but if you're just careful, it's just enough of an edge that the tool will naturally follow it. And the result is another perfectly straight panel line. It's easy as that. Okay, so the last little gadget then, I suppose, is this weird scrapey thing. Now I'll caveat this: if you have a panel line to follow, say this, it's really happy. I'll follow that, no bother. If you do not have a panel line to follow, you are going to have to use a guide with this. I've been playing with it, and you're playing with fire, honestly, if you don't have a guide. So let's pop our bit of Edward back on. PE. I'll sellotape it down here. I know it's on the slosh, but we're just demoing it, doesn't matter. You got your guide, you can rest the tool on it and just drag it along. Now this does not cut a perfect line straight in, you need to make several passes. Be patient. Get in frame. Several passes. You can see the little bits of plastic coming away. Always give it a blow. And there we'll have a new panel line, and the thing with these is it, to all intents and purposes, exactly matches the other panel lines on this kit. So to finish these panel lines, what I always do is give them a little sand, just a light sand with a sponge or a bit of wet and dry. Good old Tamiya extra thin. Not a lot, you don't want a flooded brush. Paint it along those lines. And what that does, it melts all the little bits of dust and muck that are in the bottom of the panel line, and it very slightly softens the edges of the panel line you've just put in. So it makes them look much more like they were always there. Hopefully, fairly obviously. So I think this thing here has a future on my bench, but it isn't as quick and easy to use as the trusty Alpha. I did mess about on this side. This piece here, I made this detail with a slightly bigger one, and I used it to show how with this tool you can put little notches and grooves into things far more easily than you can with anything else that I have. I made that little pretend hatch, which went really quite nicely. And the other thing this is super useful for is things like this. So this little louver panel under here, this hot air exhaust area, be a nightmare to clean up with almost anything. And your hands up who's going to break out the files to get that sorted. There's no need with one of these because it's got a sharp edge all the way up the front of this blade. So you can simply locate the tool into that louver and gently run it back and forth, and it collects up the high spots of the join and just sorts it out. It's like magic. Previously I've always used the Alpha to do this. You can do it with this as well. You can lay it into there at an angle, but because of the V shape in the bottom, you're always actually fighting it a little bit. This being flat, just collects up. There it goes. I don't think I'm zoomed in enough for you to really see it, but I can see the little bits of plastic coming away. Can't stress enough, you have to be oh so gentle. I'm really barely using any weight in this. If you start putting a lot of weight into it, you're just going to cut new holes. Give it a blow. Get that sanding sponge into those grooves. There's a bit of wet and dry there. Get the extra thin on the job. Bish bash bosh. I rest my case. So there you go. a little quick look. I realised it ended up probably being about 45 minutes, but there's so much information to get across really. A little quick look into the world of scribers, scribing tools, riveting tools and accessories. There are so many, as I say. All of the modelers will have their own preferences, of course. These are the ones I use. I've showed you how I use them. Granted, will take a little practice potentially to get the same results I do, but I've just shown you actually just how easy it can be. So hopefully that was useful to some of you. I will continue to try and make these slightly abridged technique videos. If anybody wants to see any more of this or a deeper dive into any of this, do let me know. If you do want to support the channel directly, as you know, as always, you can use the Buy Me a Coffee link down below. And with all of that said, it only remains for me to say, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out. And just to prove that there's always an encore, I forgot about the razor saw, didn't I? So the razor saw, what's it useful for? It's useful for curved areas. It's quite hard with these alpha cutters, and in fact even with the straight ones, to consistently scribe a curved surface. It tends to sort of to chatter around it. The razor saw is not really bothered. Again, you'll need a guide or a very, very steady hand, or like in this case a previously slightly done panel line. But if you get the razor saw in there and draw it round, don't try and cut through it, obvs. Just draw it round, and it will help to just make the lines consistent. It's more useful on a more tight curve, but there aren't really any. Oh, here you go, there's one on the bottom. Twing, locate it in there and just bring it across the joint area. Might seem a little bit excessive, but if you look at that panel line, which is this one here, I've just done, it doesn't actually look horrible, does it? Because of the curve being difficult, the saw will just come across the whole thing without any bother, but other scribing tools can be just a little bit awkward across tight curves. So that's where this is super useful for things like wing leading edges and tight fuselage curves and what have you, the razor saw. Okay, bye.